Determined by Robert M. Sapolsky challenges the concept of free will, arguing that human behavior is shaped by a complex interplay of biological and environmental factors. Sapolsky presents hard incompatibilism, which posits that deterministic principles govern the world, leaving no room for free will. He disputes compatibilism and explores the biological underpinnings of behavior, intent, and moral responsibility. Sapolsky critiques studies on intent, such as those inspired by Benjamin Libet, and discusses the role of consciousness and decision-making in the context of free will. He examines the influence of hormones, genetics, and cultural history on behavior, arguing that intent and actions are products of long-term biological and environmental interactions. The book delves into the legal and societal implications of rejecting free will, advocating for a compassionate understanding of human behavior that acknowledges the deterministic nature of our actions and the need for reform in areas like criminal justice. Sapolsky's work ultimately concludes that free will is an illusion, with both our biological attributes and our responses to them being outside our control. Illusions of agency. Robert M. Sapolsky presents a compelling argument against the concept of free will. He posits that human behavior is not a result of autonomous decision-making, but is instead determined by a complex interplay of biological and environmental factors. Sapolsky challenges the traditional notion that actions can occur without a cause, instead tracing behaviors back to a series of prior causes that range from immediate neural activity to deep ancestral influences. By drawing on insights from neurobiology, psychology, and other scientific disciplines, he aims to show how these factors are interconnected and collectively leave no space for the existence of free will. Sapolsky delves into 4 different perspectives on the debate between free will and determinism, ultimately aligning himself with the stance of hard incompatibilism. This view holds that the world operates on deterministic principles, and as such, free will cannot exist. He disputes the compatibilist position, which attempts to reconcile determinism with free will and moral responsibility. By examining the concept of agency and the biological foundations of behavior, Sapolsky argues that neurons do not function independently of their past influences, thereby negating the possibility of free will. He also discusses the role of meta-level consciousness and concedes that change is possible within a deterministic framework, although it does not equate to free will. Sapolsky further investigates the role of intent in moral responsibility, critiquing studies on intent, particularly those inspired by the work of Benjamin Libet. These studies suggest that the brain makes decisions before one becomes consciously aware of them. However, Sapolsky argues that such studies, which utilize EEG, fMRI, and single neuron recordings, fail to address the fundamental question of where intent originates. He asserts that humans cannot choose their intentions, and points out the shortcomings in experimental designs that do not accurately reflect real-world decision-making. Despite evidence that seems to undermine the concept of free will, Sapolsky notes that the debate persists, with compatibilists questioning the relevance of these findings to meaningful choices. Sapolsky also examines the complexities of free will, consciousness, and decision-making. He discusses how the neural signatures of decisions can precede conscious awareness, and how different brain regions are involved in making simple versus complex choices. The semantics of deciding and intending are subject to debate among philosophers and neuroscientists, who offer various interpretations. Studies on readiness potential suggest that they may not indicate decisions, but rather represent urges or preparatory processes. The predictability of behavior from neural signals is not conclusive enough to dismiss the concept of free will entirely. Sapolsky explores the idea of free won't, the ability to veto actions, and its implications for moral responsibility. He emphasizes the legal importance of intent and premeditation in criminal behavior, questioning the existence of free will despite the potential for conscious decision-making. Sapolsky criticizes the focus on intent in debates about free will, arguing that to understand actions fully, one must consider their historical and environmental origins, not just the neuroscience of decision moments. He takes issue with moralistic views that overlook the backgrounds of individuals, pointing out that luck does not average out, and that societal inequalities can amplify disadvantages, making intent a product of complex, long-term biological and environmental interactions. He contends that free will is an illusion, as the formation of intent is influenced by a complex interplay of sensory information, biological factors, and environmental history. Sensory stimuli, such as disgust or beauty, can unconsciously shape moral judgments and decisions. Hormones like testosterone can affect aggression and decision-making, with individual variations in hormone levels and brain receptor sensitivity playing a role. These factors, along with one's genetic makeup and life experiences, culminate in the intents and actions one takes, all of which are beyond personal control and conscious influence. Sapolsky discusses how hormones like oxytocin and vasopressin influence social behaviors, enhancing bonding and reducing aggression, but also promoting in-group favoritism and out-group bias. Individual differences in hormone levels and receptor variants affect traits such as parenting style and empathy. Glucocorticoids, released during stress, alter brain function, leading to impulsive and less empathic behavior. These hormones reflect one's recent stress and are influenced by factors like genes and early life conditions. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change structurally and functionally, is influenced by hormone exposure and experiences over time. Adolescence is a critical period for frontal cortex development, which is shaped by environmental factors and experiences. Childhood experiences, influenced by parenting, peers, environment, and culture, contribute to adult brain development and behavior, with epigenetics explaining how early experiences affect gene regulation in the brain. Sapolsky examines rodential mothering styles and their epigenetic consequences, including multigenerational effects, which are influenced by childhood experiences, as evidenced by adverse childhood experience (ACE scores). Higher ACE scores correlate with increased adult antisocial behavior and health issues. Conversely, positive childhood experiences predict better outcomes. Environmental factors, starting in the womb, such as maternal stress or nutrient levels, also shape adult brain function and health risks. Genes, while not determining fate, contribute to decision-making and behavior, with gene expression regulated by environmental signals. Cultural values, deeply rooted in historical and ecological contexts, further shape brain development and behavior, exemplified by differences between individualist and collectivist societies. Sapolsky's work illustrates the complex interplay of genetics, environment, and culture in shaping human behavior and potential. Illusions of will. Pastoralists' vulnerability to herd theft has shaped cultures of honor, characterized by hospitality, strict behavioral codes, and retributive violence, as seen in the American South's history of honor-related violence. Cultural tightness correlates with historical crises and population densities from 1500, influencing social norms and individual behaviors. Sapolsky argues that free will is undermined by the seamless stream of uncontrollable influences shaping us, from genetics to cultural history, and that luck, rather than ontology, negates moral responsibility. The concept of turtles all the way down illustrates the impossibility of proving free will when every action is the result of preceding factors. Sapolsky refutes compatibilist views that dismiss the relevance of historical luck, asserting that our Constitution is entirely shaped by uncontrollable past events. Sapolsky challenges the concept of free will, arguing that all actions are the result of one's biological history and environmental interactions, over which individuals have no control. He critiques the notion that free will exists in the past or future, or in unexamined brain regions, and that social constructs can define free will. Sapolsky uses a case study of a man with a traumatic history to illustrate how unlikely it is for such an individual to make a free, rational decision in a stressful moment. Philosophers and neuroscientists who support the existence of free will are critiqued for overlooking the deterministic nature of biology and environment. Sapolsky also examines the idea that individuals can gradually acquire free will through maturation or crisis, but he dismisses this, emphasizing that past actions are as determined as present ones. He concludes that the belief in free will is a myth, with both our biological attributes and our responses to them being outside our control. The human frontal cortex, especially the prefrontal cortex, PFC, is a recent evolutionary development that plays a central role in executive functions like decision-making, impulse control, and emotional regulation. Sapolsky explains that the PFC is responsible for inhibiting habitual responses to allow for novel actions, a process that can be observed in reversal tasks and is impaired in individuals with PFC damage. The PFC also regulates social behavior, with neuroimaging studies showing its involvement in suppressing racial biases and managing social rejection. Furthermore, the PFC's interaction with the limbic system is crucial for emotional input in decision-making. Damage to the PFC can lead to poor decision-making and socially inappropriate behavior, highlighting its role in both inhibiting and promoting certain actions based on context. Sapolsky concludes that the PFC's development is influenced by both biology and environment, challenging the dichotomy between innate attributes and choices. During cognitive tasks, the prefrontal cortex, PFC, consumes significant energy, impacting self-regulation and decision-making. Sapolsky explains that factors like stress, hunger, and fatigue deplete the PFC's energy reserves, leading to impaired function. For instance, judges are more likely to deny parole when hungry, and doctors prescribe more opiates as the day progresses. Hormones like testosterone and glucocorticoids affect PFC function, influencing impulsivity and stress responses. Chronic stress can cause PFC atrophy, while positive experiences like exercise can enhance its function. Childhood and adolescence significantly shape the adult PFC, with abuse and socioeconomic status affecting its development. These factors, often beyond individual control, challenge the notion of freely chosen grit and influence the PFC's regulatory abilities over impulses and decision-making. Childhood socioeconomic status influences adult glucocorticoid levels, PFC size, and task performance, with early adversity impacting brain development and function. Sapolsky highlights genetic variations affecting PFC activity and sensitivity to environmental factors, including peer pressure. Cultural upbringing shapes PFC function, with collectivist and individualist societies showing distinct neural patterns. Gene-culture coevolution affects PFC traits, reinforcing cultural values. The PFC's role in perceived free will is questioned, as its function is predetermined by a seamless arc of influences, challenging the notion of self-discipline and willpower. Sapolsky explores the overturning of deterministic views by chaos theory, emergent complexity, and quantum indeterminacy, challenging reductionism and the notion of linear predictability. He critiques the misuse of these concepts to justify free will and criticizes moral judgments that ignore the complexities of human behavior. Sapolsky recounts Edward Lorenz's discovery of the butterfly effect, illustrating how small variations can lead to unpredictable outcomes, a cornerstone of chaos theory that defies simple cause and effect understanding. Sapolsky explores cellular automata, specifically Rule 22, to demonstrate chaoticism and sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Different starting states, when applied to Rule 22, unpredictably evolve into mature patterns that are either extinct, periodic, or dynamic. This unpredictability and the inability to deduce the starting state from the mature pattern exemplify chaos theory's principles, which also apply to biological systems and have implications for free will beliefs. Chaos theory, initially overlooked due to its complexity and the reductive mindset of researchers, eventually gained traction, influencing various fields and public interest. Sapolsky discusses how chaoticism, despite being deterministic, is often mistakenly associated with free will due to its unpredictability. Thinkers like Gert Eilenberger and Kelly Clancy argue that chaoticism's unpredictability opens the possibility for free will. However, Sapolsky emphasizes that determinism and predictability are distinct, and chaotic systems, while unpredictable, are still deterministic. The confusion between the two leads to erroneous beliefs about free will, which some equate with biological processes not yet understood. Sapolsky also addresses the concept of convergence, where different starting points in a system can lead to identical outcomes, challenging radical eliminative reductionism but not determinism itself. Blueprintless complexity. Emergent complexity, as explored by Sapolsky, defies reductionist determinism by demonstrating that simple components can self-assemble into intricate systems without a blueprint or blueprint maker. This phenomenon is evident in both biological and non-biological systems, where a multitude of identical elements following basic rules can produce unpredictably complex and adaptive structures and behaviors. Examples include ant colonies forming sophisticated societies and bees efficiently locating food sources through swarm intelligence. Emergent properties are robust and resilient, often solving optimization problems such as the traveling salesman problem more efficiently than brute force methods. Emergent systems are deterministic, yet their outcomes can be unpredictable due to the collective interactions of their components. Slime molds, ants, bees, and neurons share a common mechanism of pathfinding and network formation without centralized decision-making. Sapolsky describes how slime molds optimize pathways between food sources, similar to Tokyo's train system, through tubule contractions directed by food quality. Neurons grow by following gradients of attractant molecules, with the strongest signals guiding growth cone direction. The brain's cortex develops through radial glia acting as scaffolding, guiding neuron migration and forming functional columns. These biological systems, including the circulatory system and trees, exhibit fractal-like bifurcation where simple scale-free rules lead to complex structures. Genes provide instructions for growth and bifurcation, with some coding for proteins used across different systems. Emergent complexity in biological and non-biological systems, like river deltas and religious histories, follows similar principles of local interactions and iterative processes. Sapolsky illustrates how neuronal clusters form through attractant and repellent signals, without the need for a master plan. In Determined, Sapolsky explores power law distributions, such as the 80-20 rule, across various systems, demonstrating their prevalence from social interactions to natural phenomena. He discusses the adaptiveness of these distributions in biological contexts, including foraging patterns and brain network organization. Sapolsky also examines emergent systems, showing how simple interactions can lead to complex optimized structures without central planning, and how this relates to the concept of free will. Emergence involves complex states arising from simple components, which some philosophers like Christian List and Robert Caine argue is where free will exists, rather than at the neurobiological level. Sapolsky critiques this view, explaining that unpredictability in emergent systems does not equate to indeterminism. He challenges the notion that emergent systems can produce multiple outcomes from identical starting states, or that emergent states can act independently of their constituent parts. Sapolsky also disputes the idea that emergent states can alter the fundamental nature of their components, emphasizing that emergence does not grant free will, as the systems remain deterministic. Sapolsky explores the concept of indeterminacy in the universe, particularly at the subatomic level where determinism fails. He discusses the randomness of particle movement, exemplified by Brownian motion, and its implications for biology, such as the distribution of axon terminals and the aggregation of proteins in Alzheimer's disease. Sapolsky also addresses the role of randomness in behavior, like the Levy-Walk foraging pattern of organisms. He delves into quantum mechanics, detailing phenomena like particle-wave duality, the uncertainty principle, and quantum entanglement, which challenge traditional deterministic views and open speculative connections to free will. Quantum mechanics has been co-opted by various fields, from quantum metaphysics to quantum psychotherapy, often without scientific rigor or endorsement by experts in neuroscience. Sapolsky critiques the misuse of quantum concepts to explain free will and consciousness, particularly by those not trained in brain science. He challenges the notion that quantum indeterminacy can influence human behavior, citing the improbability of quantum events at the subatomic level affecting large-scale biological processes. Sapolsky also recounts the controversial ideas of Nobel laureate John Eccles, who linked consciousness to quantum mechanics, and the skepticism these ideas have faced from the scientific community. Despite Eccles' stature, his theories on quantum consciousness are largely dismissed. Spontaneous vesicular release of neurotransmitters, once thought to be random, is actually a complex, regulated process with distinct machinery from intentional release, influenced by various factors including hormones and diseases. This release serves purposes such as preventing synaptic atrophy and aiding brain development. Even seemingly random neuron action potentials have mechanistic causes and serve functions, like preventing muscle atrophy. The default mode network, once considered mere background noise, is now understood as an active, purposeful brain state involved in creative problem-solving. Sapolsky argues that none of these processes, despite their indeterminacy, provide evidence for quantum effects influencing free will. He challenges the notion that quantum mechanics could underpin free will, as it would imply randomness, not rational agency. Sapolsky also critiques models that suggest harnessing quantum randomness for consistent moral behavior, questioning the origins of the filters or criteria that would guide such a process. Sapolsky challenges the notion that quantum indeterminacy and non-material information in the brain can explain free will, arguing that such theories lack biological evidence and may inadvertently equate free will with randomness. He also critiques reductionism while acknowledging its limits. Robert M. Sapolsky's Determined argues that behavior is a product of biological determinants and environmental interactions, leaving no room for free will. The book explores the seamless continuum of evolution, genetics, and brain function that shapes individuals, challenging the notion of free will and addressing the difficulty in predicting behavior despite deterministic underpinnings. Sapolsky aims to provoke thought on free will's existence and its implications for human functioning. Running amok, historically linked to being possessed by spirits, is now examined through the lens of free will skepticism. Sapolsky explores how diminished belief in free will, induced by reading scientific arguments like those of Francis Crick, affects behavior. Studies show that skepticism reduces effort and attention in tasks. Behavioral experiments suggest that free will skeptics might cheat more, help less, and feel less gratitude, though these effects are small and not always replicable. Larger studies and a meta-analysis reveal no consistent impact on ethical behavior. Sapolsky also delves into the prejudice against atheists, often seen as immoral due to the assumption that godlessness equates to a lack of morality, despite evidence to the contrary. Morality beyond belief. Robert M. Sapolsky's research challenges the notion that atheists are less moral than theists. Studies initially suggest religious individuals are more prosocial, but this is confounded by self-reporting biases and demographic factors like age and socioeconomic status. When controlling for these, differences in prosocial behavior largely disappear. Religious primes can enhance prosocial behavior in theists, but secular primes have a similar effect on atheists. The prosociality of religious individuals often extends only to in-group members, while atheists tend to be more accepting of out-groups. Scandinavian countries, which are highly secular, exhibit high levels of societal well-being, suggesting that a lack of religious belief does not equate to moral decay. Belief in free will varies. Those with malleable beliefs may act unethically when swayed. Robert M. Sapolsky's review of studies finds ethical behavior consistent across free will skeptics and believers. Determined explores the concept of free will and moral responsibility, challenging the notion that humans are autonomous agents. Sapolsky argues that behavior is not a product of free will, but is shaped by biological processes and environmental stimuli. The book delves into the neurobiology of the California sea hare, Aplysia, to illustrate how behavior changes mechanistically in response to external factors. Eric Kandel's Nobel Prize-winning research on Aplysia demonstrates that even complex behavioral adaptations are the result of predictable, evolved biological pathways. Sapolsky extends these findings to human behavior, suggesting that similar molecular and genetic mechanisms underlie our actions, devoid of free will. Eye-blink conditioning in mammals, including humans, is an adaptive response that can be explained by deterministic neural circuits, as demonstrated by Robert M. Sapolsky. This conditioning involves a series of neurons that, through repeated stimulation and neurotransmitter release, form new synapses, enabling a conditioned response to a previously neutral stimulus. The process is similar across species, from humans to marine sea slugs, highlighting the evolutionary conservation of this mechanism. Early life experiences, such as maternal separation in rats, can epigenetically alter these circuits, affecting the ability to acquire conditioned responses. This extends to the amygdala's role in fear conditioning, where various factors, including stress hormones and genetic predispositions, shape an individual's susceptibility to forming conditioned fear responses. Sapolsky illustrates how deterministic processes govern even complex behaviors, challenging the notion of free will and moral responsibility. Neurons form networks categorizing concepts like sacrifice, optimism, and peace, with experiences shaping synaptic strengths, as Sapolsky simplifies the concept by explaining how neurons form networks that categorize abstract concepts such as sacrifice, optimism, and peace. Our experiences influence the strength of the synaptic connections within these networks, further illustrating the deterministic nature of our brain's functioning. Sapolsky takes us on a journey that begins with personal tragedy and leads to a deeper understanding of violence through the lens of biology. He argues that change in behavior is not a matter of choice, but rather the result of environmental influences. The chapter explores the biology of neurons, detailing the mechanisms behind action potentials and refractory periods. It also delves into the history of epilepsy, from ancient misconceptions and brutal treatments to a modern understanding of its neurological basis. Sapolsky shows how societal responses to epilepsy have evolved, moving from theories of demonic possession to genetic explanations, demonstrating how scientific progress can lead to the shedding of hate and blame. Historically, epilepsy was associated with violence and moral failings, but advances in 19th-century science began to challenge these misconceptions. Hewlings-Jackson's concept of localization and the recognition of the brain's electrical nature suggested epilepsy was an electrical issue. Legal and psychiatric perspectives evolved, recognizing that individuals with epilepsy should not be held responsible for actions during seizures. Despite this progress, stigma persists, especially in less educated and developing communities. Modern responses to epilepsy-related incidents, like driving during a seizure, focus on safety without assigning blame. However, cases like Dorothy Bruns, who drove despite medical advice, complicate the narrative, raising questions about responsibility when personal decisions exacerbate risks. Sapolsky argues for a compassionate understanding of the biological determinants of such decisions, advocating for a shift in perception akin to the evolution of understanding epilepsy. Schizophrenia, once attributed to schizophrenogenic mothering, is now understood as a neurodevelopmental disorder with genetic components. Early Freudian psychoanalysts, influenced by European intellectuals, dominated American psychiatry, promoting the idea that poor mothering caused schizophrenia. This theory, lacking empirical evidence, was replaced by modern findings that schizophrenia involves genetic risk factors and environmental stressors, such as prenatal malnutrition or infections. The disorder is characterized by an excess of dopamine, leading to aberrant salience and hallucinations, and structural brain changes, particularly in the frontal cortex. Sapolsky explains that schizophrenia's onset during late adolescence or early adulthood is due to the final maturation of the frontal cortex. Antipsychotic drugs, which block dopamine receptors, have revolutionized treatment, moving away from blaming mothers to understanding schizophrenia as a biological condition. Eleanor Owen's response to a murder by a schizophrenic individual sparked the formation of advocacy groups, leading to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI. NAMI, with key figures like Lori Flynn and Ron Honberg, and the support of E. Fuller Torrey, a psychiatrist with a personal connection to schizophrenia, challenged the notion of schizophrenogenic families and pushed for biological understandings of mental illness. Their efforts, alongside applied celebrity and public education, helped shift the narrative, removing blame from families. Similarly, autism's refrigerator mother theory was debunked, with Leo Kanner apologizing for his role in perpetuating the myth. However, the anti-vaxxer movement has introduced new blame narratives. Advances in understanding PTSD, Gulf War syndrome, dyslexia, sexual orientation, and gender identity demonstrate a broader societal shift towards removing responsibility from individuals for conditions beyond their control. Sapolsky highlights these changes, emphasizing the positive impact of understanding the biological underpinnings of behavior. Punishment and free will. The 14th century in Europe was marked by the 100 Years' War, religious turmoil, and the devastating Black Plague. Earlier in 1321, peasants faced illiteracy, disease, and famine, with a third of infants dying before age 1. That summer, a conspiracy theory accused lepers of well poisoning, which under torture they confessed to, implicating Jews, who in turn blamed Muslims. This led to the mass execution of lepers and Jews. Sapolsky discusses the irrationality of historical and modern justice systems, highlighting the need for reform. He critiques the notion of free will and suggests a quarantine model for criminal justice, drawing parallels with medical practices and emphasizing minimal constraint for protection. Greg Caruso extends Paraboom's quarantine model to criminology, advocating for minimal constraints on individuals who cannot control their dangerous behavior, while emphasizing the need to address social justice issues that contribute to criminality. Quarantine models face criticism, including concerns over indefinite detention, preemptive constraint, and the moral dilemma of constraining individuals for actions not their fault. Caruso counters with evidence from Scandinavian open prisons, which successfully rehabilitate criminals with humane conditions and lower overall costs. Sapolsky appreciates the quarantine model's alignment with the absence of free will, but acknowledges the challenge posed by society's desire to punish. Historical examples illustrate the evolution of punishment and cooperation, highlighting the complexity of social behavior and the mechanisms that regulate it. Third-party punishment, where an outsider punishes a transgressor, is a uniquely human, altruistic act that fosters cooperation and is more common in larger societies. Oxytocin increases willingness to engage in third-party punishment, which is costlier than direct punishment but can enhance one's reputation. Cross-cultural research shows that small traditional societies rely less on third-party punishment due to close-knit relationships. The concept of moralizing gods emerges in larger societies to monitor behavior. Punishment in economic games like the ultimatum game can be rational if future interactions are expected, but single-round altruistic punishment is costly. Enjoyment of punishment is deeply rooted, as shown by children and chimps willing to pay to see a mean individual punished. Neuroimaging studies reveal that punishing unfairness activates brain regions associated with disgust, anger, and reward. Retributive punishment feels good, with reward circuitry activation similar to pleasurable experiences. Sapolsky's work also delves into the fascination with serial killers and the public's response to high-profile executions, highlighting the complexity of punishment and its societal implications. The execution process often involves untrained personnel, leading to botched IV insertions and potential consciousness during the procedure. Drug manufacturers' reluctance to supply lethal drugs has led states to use untested drug combinations. Timothy McVeigh's execution, however, was uneventful, with his last meal and final nod to witnesses being notable details. The event was heavily covered by media, with varying witness accounts and a catered press area. Sapolsky discusses the evolution of public attitudes towards punishment, from violent mobs to state-sanctioned executions, reflecting a shift in the source of state legitimacy. He challenges the notion of free will and the ethical justification of punishment, citing studies that question the concept of closure for victims' families and their preference for rehabilitation over retribution. Sapolsky contrasts American and Norwegian responses to terrorism, highlighting Norway's humane treatment of Anders Breivik and the societal emphasis on democratic values and forgiveness. He reflects on the difficulty of accepting a lack of free will in criminal justice, and his personal struggle with this concept while working on murder trials. Sapolsky concludes that society can function without attributing free will to actions, as evidenced by historical shifts in understanding diseases and disorders. Robert M. Sapolsky explores the concept of free will, arguing that the universe is indifferent and events occur due to preceding ones. He delves into terror management theory, which examines how humans cope with death's inevitability and life's unpredictability. Sapolsky challenges compatibilist philosophers who assert free will's existence alongside determinism, suggesting they're motivated by the discomfort of its absence. He discusses studies indicating that depressed individuals may have a more accurate perception of control. Sapolsky also examines the implications of rejecting free will, including moral responsibility and the meaning of accomplishments, and suggests that acknowledging our lack of free will is crucial, despite its discomforting nature. Leptin, a hormone regulating fat storage and satiety, can be affected by mutations leading to obesity. Sapolsky explores the complex interplay of genetics and environment on body mass index, BMI, including prenatal factors and socioeconomic status. Genetic variations influence how diet, exercise, and stress affect obesity risk. Despite scientific understanding of these biological determinants, societal biases against obesity persist, even among medical students. Sapolsky also discusses the broader implications of attributing personal traits to character rather than biology, highlighting the pain of self-blame for conditions like bipolar disorder, ADHD, and autism. The book argues against the moral judgment of individuals based on uncontrollable biological factors, advocating for a compassionate understanding of human diversity and the rejection of the just world fallacy.